So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us after a long, exciting day. I don't know how many of you managed to shake Emmanuel Macron's hand. Put your hands up. That's, wow. Round of applause, because it's more than half the room. Anyway, that's great, because part of what we try and do here at the Forum is actually make things as human as possible and make the people here as approachable as possible. And in reading a summary that Playbook Politico, which is a publication, online publication, which is in started, I think, in the US, in Washington, moved to Brussels. So Ryan Heath is one of the key people there. He, in his Playbook summary this morning, said that it was like Davos, but nobody has any entourage around them. What does that mean? It means that, and I hope this is the case in what you found, and if you didn't, you should say it. You can go up to people, and you can go up to anybody, and hopefully you've found yourself next to very interesting people. People that maybe might not have been, might not be easy to get in touch with. And I would say, probably as if not more importantly, other people have had the privilege of landing next to you. Because in terms of levels of interest, I think the key element, and I was talking to Branko Milanovic, he's quite a famous name, and he was saying how appreciative he was of the fact that he was landing up next to people he would never network with. What happens when you network normally, you tend to network with people that you already know, or people like you. And so one of the things that I would like us to try and analyze a little bit in this final session is the degree to which we are in a space where we all think alike, where, you know, the French expression la pensée unique. It was very criticized at a certain point, what took us to perhaps certain crises and certain moments in time. And if your feeling over the last couple of days is that, yes, it is quite like that, it does conform to that, or no, not necessarily. Some quite distinct and different views expressed. And the thing I would say is, at the outset is that I can't make suppositions about all of the 3,000 people who come to the Forum. Some of you I have the privilege of knowing. Some of you I've known for many years. Some of you I've just met, and some of you I have yet to meet properly. But what I don't know is everything about you. And you don't know everything about me. And you don't know everything about Bruce. You know certain things. You know people's titles. You can make your judgments and opinions, but what are our backgrounds, and where do we come from, and where do we grow up, and in what conditions did we grow up, and exactly what was our education at a certain point in time, what did our parents do? We don't know those things necessarily, so I wouldn't like to make an assumption which is that everybody here is exactly the same and very homogeneous. And part of what we want to do is analyze in this space now what has come through from the Forum. Now, the first thing I want to do is just a quick reminder. How many of you were here last year? So it's a decent proportion, and thank you for coming back, and thank you for coming here now, because that's an interesting question in itself. There are threads between fora and fora, and we work very hard, and the team here works really hard to make sure that we're honest and true to that. Sometimes the political pressures make people have amnesia about the year before, and you know, now the theme is this, and they forget all about the year before. And we're very conscious in the Forum context that we need to have threads that go through things. So last year, we wanted to bridge divides. The Secretary General described in the opening the fact that things were very stark. It was black and white. Well, that was deliberate. It was to try also and subliminally communicate a difficult set of circumstances that we were all confronting. I had a really interesting conversation with a gentleman just here yesterday saying, but nothing big happened in 2016, it was happening before. It was a build-up of things, and then, so I think we agreed with each other at the end. Not that we had to, it was more that the point he was making, which was very valid, which was the problem started well before 2016, for 2016 was the manifestation and the explosion. And probably, I started here in 2008. The global financial crisis was the explosion, the manifestation of things that have been building up over a long period of time. Now, we've been very ambitious this year. We've tried to cover inclusive growth, a geography of discontent, left out and left behind, housing. It's not an issue that we've tended to dwell on so much when we've been looking at inclusivity, and some really interesting discussions around that question. How difficult it is to reskill, because the OECD is great at saying, oh, we should all reskill. And so Amy Goldstein came, having written her book about Janesville, and said, you know what? They tried that, and it didn't actually work. And that's a very important thing for us to also factor in, which is, it's great to have buzzwords. In one of the idea factories, and I'm flitting a little bit, but someone said, oh yeah, co-creation. That's a buzzword. We're using that word. Thing is that we're only scratching the surface. But our friend from Copenhagen Business School said, yeah, and now everybody has co-creation in every project, so it's become a buzzword. I think there we're looking at actually when we actually walk the walk on things, or how easy genuinely is it to do that. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on the degree to which there's co-creation that somehow takes place in this context and over the last couple of days. And I know Bruce has views on that. Recruiting in a digital age, super interesting. There we had recruiters, but also recruitees, people who are on the receiving end. Patients. So we talk a lot about health. What about the people who actually get treated? Having patients here to be able to provide that testimony. Addressing loneliness. How often do international organizations address loneliness? Singularity. It's a concept we've been playing with for some time. And digitalization, I would say probably a little bit more well-trodden path. Future of work, hugely attended. A lot of the sessions, I got a lot of people saying to me, you need to build a bigger building. I don't know what potential we have to do that, but it sounded like there were a lot of spaces which were full to capacity. And if that is the case, that is a great sign. I know there were some spaces that weren't. I don't think that this is, you know, everywhere is full at times. Our 15 by 15 space, and that may have been a location where things took place. Discussions around universal digital rights, and I'm going to come back to that. Cybersecurity, civic debate on the rise of artificial intelligence, and underpinning all of this, obviously, with international cooperation, and now with multilateralism. And there was a very interesting conversation I had with our Korean friends from KDI, who were saying to me, Anthony, you diluted, when you used the word in the forum international cooperation and not multilateralism, you diluted, because multilateralism has the concept of non-discrimination. Now this is getting into cognoscenti talk, but non-discrimination, is that something that's really important when we think about what we've managed to achieve so far, that we don't discriminate between each other? Of course, that's a theory, and I'd say that the practice is that we haven't walked that walk, but is that ambition something that we still need to keep? So it made me think, well, my problem was that multilateralism is an abstruse term that if I were to ask people down the pub, or when I go and watch my local football team, which is rare, you know, they'd probably look at me or they'd walk away. They wouldn't be interested. And so do we have a capacity actually to talk to people who are normal people and who deserve our respect, and who, I think, Bruce, if I'm not taking words out of your mouth, I think you said we need to get over it. We need to realize that actually it's our job to go to them. It's our job to somehow go to them. And that goes into the spatial elements as well, which is you can virtually go to people, you can literally go up to people. How many times have you gone up to people in the forum and beaten away timidity? It's not easy to go up to someone you don't know. How many times have people come up to you and they've beaten back their timidity? How many times have people taken the floor and we've been talking about them and their area? And I think I recognize the gentleman here in the front row. Trapp. We had a whole session on a community which is 25 kilometers outside Paris. It's a book written by a Le Monde journalist. And we have a gentleman in the front row. He comes from there. And we have someone who comes to the forum who comes from Trappes. That's not people like us in the classic sense of the word, and yet it is. That's great. If that's people like us, then I think we're doing our job. So we built on bridging divides, and the ambition then was to pose that question. What brings us together? And it's a question. The reason that there's no question mark in French is purely and simply grammatical and space. Ce qui nous rapproche is a statement in French. If you ask the question, it's a lot longer in French. But we wanted to ask the question because we didn't want to start this week by saying, we know that really everything brings us together and it's just a question of listing it all and everything will be fine and we just have to remember all of that stuff. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but in posing the question, I would certainly say that I would anticipate it's actually likelier for people maybe to come to that answer than if you shove it down their throat to start with to say things really do bring us together. I'm just going to chuck out a couple of things that I heard beyond what I've said already. And I had the privilege of running a couple of Meet the Author sessions, the first one on Trappes and the second one on democracy with Yasha Monk. And Yasha Monk cited J. Cole, the rapper. How many of you are fans of J. Cole? How many of you have heard J. Cole? You have. 2, any more? 3, good. 4, okay, don't be shy. Jonathan, is that a... No, okay, despite coming from LA, you've not heard... Oh, I'm disappointed. Okay. So, and I'm going to swear on stage, apologies for doing this. Yasha cited J. Cole and his verse in a song that he's come out with recently. Democracy is too fucking slow. If I'm giving you all this hard-earned bread, I want to know better. Better yet, let me decide it's 2018. There's a lot of things that people say in songs. And we know this and down the ages, a lot of songs that have been played back from 1968 and moments of this type. But it's really interesting to be listening to what is coming through in songs because in art, that's really profound and deep stuff that is reflecting what people are thinking. So that slowness of democracy, I think, is a really interesting thing for us to dwell on. Liam Byrne, who came over from London, was held up a little bit. He decided to take an airplane rather than the train, which was a very bad idea. He's a member of Parliament, Shadow Minister on digital in the United Kingdom. He asked the OECD to help build an overlapping consensus for a digital bill of rights. That's not an easy thing for us to do, but that's something we've heard. Our friend, the lawyer on the panel on democracy this morning, said that the OECD needs to radically overhaul the Model Tax Convention and transfer pricing system. I think we're doing a certain amount of that, but maybe not as quickly as he would have liked or some people would have hoped. Rebecca McKinnon, ranking digital rights. Digital rights are really human rights. They're not some special set of rights. They're only digital. We had Luca Vicentini from the ETUC. We have to stop fighting against the changes and try to interpret the changes, to understand the changes. Why are they happening? How are they happening? And what can trade unions do to protect workers that are affected by these changes? But those why questions and how questions came up quite a lot. David Lucas, he's a senator and former mayor of Móstoles in Spain. It's a town very close to Madrid, which suffered probably the most from austerity of any town in Spain following the crisis. I'm surprised to hear that only one option, when there are no jobs, is to move somewhere else. As a mayor, I just cannot tell people to go elsewhere. Rob Nail, Singularity University. I think we have a hard time defining what intelligence is. I think there's intelligence in most of these machines. I started in robotics, and I feel we're just biological robots. On housing, Vanessa Engel, the head of Banque Solidaire de l'Équipement. Sans logement, on ne peut pas tenir un travail dans la durée. Et sans travail, il n'y a pas de logement. So that's a catch-22 between work and housing. You've got no work, you can't get any housing. You've got no housing, you can't get any work. Loneliness. Anchak Heek. Loneliness shortens lifespans. It's even more serious than obesity, according to a number of studies. Have we thought through that? We all talk about obesity. We don't talk so much about loneliness. Future of the European Union, that was this morning. It's a microcosm of the broader debate. It's a macrocosm of international cooperation. And we heard about the importance of reconnecting with purpose. That word purpose came up a lot. Why? And we heard about the importance of delivery on promises and about responding to the concerns of citizens rather than expecting them to adapt to our agendas. Now, what I'd like us to do now is take a glimpse at some of the people that we've heard from in the course of the last 2 days. And there's a short video that the team have compiled in short order. I don't know if they can go ahead and play that.
International cooperation is extremely important since we face challenges that go beyond our borders, and we cannot have national solutions. We actually do need to work together.
L'éducation est plus que jamais au cœur de la société.
Education is at the heart of society, and education is what creates trust in society, because this is how you can understand the big challenges. The more I learn, the more I free myself. To refound the multilateral system, you have to go further, and you need to have three-party talks between government, private sector, and civil society.
To take responsibility for ourselves, but at the same time think about the needs of others. To be fully human means taking the whole world into consideration.
We need to find more ways to help people build social connections with each other and create the kind of social capital that makes societies thrive.
Every company has to build in from the ground level a belief that it is their job and responsibility to treat their users with the kind of privacy, respect, and security that they would want to treat their own family members with.
That there doesn't have to be a conflict between business and social welfare. I actually think these two can be complementary, that businesses can help provide and drive the well-being of society.
Cuando se tiene acceso a la digitalización, las mujeres tienen posibilidades de negocios, tienen posibilidades de tener acceso financiero, posibilidades de tener ayuda cuando están en emergencia. Es el futuro del trabajo.
Donc s'il y avait un conseil à donner aux jeunes qui rentrent sur le
If I were to give an advice to young people working on the labor market, is the world is changing. It's somewhat stressful, but if you have the right know-how, you may have opportunities.
Which I wouldn't be without. They are not as superior as the human. They do not have souls. They do not have feelings. They do not have instinct in the way that humans do.
We need to work much closer with the tech companies, and we need to have them assume a responsibility which is proportional to the kind of influence they're exercising towards you and me, but also on global affairs.
Ce qui nous rapproche ici, c'est
What brings us together is the fact that we have a societal dimension in economic projects where we're looking for excellence, forgetting along the way the human factor, which is essential. There can be no possible economic survival for our political or institutional systems unless we take a hard look at the concept of inequality.
That's the first time I've seen that, and that was recorded in the last couple of days. So I'd certainly like to applaud the people who put that together. It looks very slick. It wasn't pre-cooked, and that means that you've got to get people into a space, you've got to ask them a question, and you've got to hope that they actually say something that can be showable subsequently. And anybody who's done an interview knows that you can go on for ages, and then it's horrible when you actually get it played back to you. So to see people also who have a capacity to express themselves with that degree of lucidity and succinctness is also something that is really valuable. I want to kick off and hand the floor first off to Bruce. Bruce, those of you who don't know, he's been a friend of the forum for many years. He works for the Pew Research Center, and he and I met many years ago around international trade, which is an issue and a subject that exercises a lot of minds, and we still have a great deal in common around that. But when we talk about a lot of the issues that are at play today, problems around globalization, many of those things, we're able to reminisce on a lot of things that maybe emerged back in the 80s and the 90s. And Bruce has been part of the forum for a long time. He's done us the grace also of participating in 2 of the idea factories that we organized this year. There were 3 in total, and the ones that he focused on were on rebooting international cooperation, which is obviously a nice way of talking about the theme that is going to dominate the ministerial meeting kicked off by Emmanuel Macron. So I'd like to ask Bruce what you heard, what you took away from those 6, 7, 8 hours of group work, which was high quality. How many of you were in the idea factories over the last few days? Excellent. Well, I really hope that you'll be able to sort of come in and complement. Go ahead, Bruce.
Anthony, thank you. And first off, I'd like to really salute the OECD for what I think is an ongoing exercise in trying to broaden the participation of people in this forum, the various stakeholders in the global community. I know this is a theme in other multilateral institutions, but I must say that I think in this one, you've gone even further this year in engaging people in a discussion that's very fundamental to the future of multilateralism. And certainly the session I participated in, and those of you who were in those same sessions, if you have other things to add or if you want to contradict what I'm about to say, feel free to do that. But what struck me is that, first off, in that session, those sessions about rebooting or reimagining multilateralism, we were not caught up in the idea of, well, do they like us or not? I mean, there's public opinion data that show when you ask people about various multilateral institutions, assuming they know what they are, they tend to have a positive view of them. That's not the question. The issue is that the worry is that these institutions are not addressing the issues that are driving people's anxiety, driving people's concern about the future, about the pace of change. And we do have data on that show that many people all over the world say the pace of change is too fast and they're losing their traditional way of life. So we started our conversation, at least in the part of the group that I was in, what are some of these animating factors beyond the fact that people don't like trade or they're worried about globalization? What about the people's sense of identity, their various identities, that human beings are men or they're women or they're young or they're old or they're of one religion or another, or they are members of one community and not another. They are in one kind of relationship with a partner or another kind of relationship. And are those identities at threat? And we have found from some surveys data that people believe that their traditional identities are under some kind of siege. And then how does that inform how they view multilateralism, internationalism, the things that this organization is trying to address? We talked a great deal then in our group about the fact that multilateral institutions are information-based, they are fact-based, they purport to be reality-based, but that's all terribly rational. And many of our peoples deal more on emotion than on reason. And I think that's where I made that statement about, we got to get over this. We, I think, implicitly, and I'll say this for all of us, maybe you'll disagree, that we look down on people who vote on emotion. They should vote on reason. But we don't look down on people when they go into the marketplace and buy a blue car rather than a red car, even though it's the same car. We just say, well, that's human nature. They like blue rather than red. We have to understand that people operate on emotion, and we have to figure out a way to deal with that, and not to just tell them they've got to see the world the way we see it and we experience it. So that was one of the, I thought, the more profound things we talked about in that group. We talked about the increasing complexity of the world and how do multilateral institutions help people navigate that complexity in some way that helps solve the problems that they tell us they're feeling, because I think it's one of the other reasons that multilateralism needs a rethink, and that is that, do we listen enough? We at the Pew Research Center believe what the founder of the Pew Charitable Trust that funds us once said: you should listen to the people. And that's hard for all of us to do, let's be honest, because we think we know what's right. And if people would just see the things the way we do and understand things, we could get things done. The reality is we need to spend more time listening to people. The Goldstein's book, about, right, we all have these buzzwords about retraining, but the reality is, I know from studying this in the United States, much of that doesn't work. And we have to hear back from people who've gone through that and say, look, that's a great idea, but this doesn't work. And what other solutions do we have for people? And I think we learned from that by listening to them and talking with them. And finally, it seems to me, I think we have to, and we ended our session with a very existential question, which is, it is an adventure, and it is bold and brave to think about rebooting or reinventing this multilateral institution and other multilateral institutions. But at what point do we say, just as when you're constantly rehabbing your house and you decide, I don't need to add another room, I don't need to add a better bathroom, I just need to go build a new house. And that's, I think, one of the questions we all have to be intellectually honest with ourselves, is do the problems of the future require new kinds of multilateral institutions, not a reform of old multilateral institutions? And the fact that an organization like the OECD could even entertain those kind of very challenging questions, I think, is a sign of real progress. And we should be, and you should be all proud of the fact that you're participating in that kind of discussion.
Thank you. Dan Newman helped us put these idea factories together, and he and his team, that visual you saw was done by a scribe, I think, who was listening to Bruce do a summing up in one of the sessions, and we had a number of elements there which we're going to capture and we're going to share with you through the forum network. Those of you who haven't joined it yet, it should be a miracle if you haven't joined it yet. Hands up if you haven't joined the online forum network yet. Very few. Well done. No, I'm being facetious. The reason I'm doing it is because when you walk away from here, this doesn't stop and end here. The idea is that this keeps going and things happen from this. So we will use that network in order to be able to inject elements for you and for you to be able to use, for you to be able to critique and to be able to build off. But can I ask you, Dan, to give us a flavor of the elements you took, because structurally what we did was we had a session on Monday evening, and thank you to those who made the time to already come on a Monday, and asked them to reimagine international cooperation. Actually, we asked them to imagine, look, yes, you're in 2018, but imagine there isn't anything. No, there isn't an OECD and a WTO and all of this stuff. Don't clutter up your head. Imagine, and you've got all the tools at your disposal now. You've got civic tech, you've got platforms, you've got the world's your oyster, and that's not an easy thing to get people. You can say you want them to try and do that, and then they may or may not be able to do that. And then we had a second session, which was yesterday, where initially we were thinking, well, we'll ask that first group to think crazy thoughts, share those crazy thoughts with the second group, and then the second group will shoot those crazy thoughts down. And I wasn't able to participate in all of the second, but I was in at the beginning and I was in at the end, and I found that some of the discussion in the second group may have been more progressive and racy in the let's do something new sense than the first one. So much for your grand plans. Anyway, Dan, what was your take on, firstly on the two international cooperation spaces?
I learned a lot from it. I mean, that was not why I was invited, but I was one of the big beneficiaries. I think to Bruce's point, it was all about listening and helping people feel that they were listened to, and thereby discovering their own ideas often. And I discovered other people's ideas that way. One was when we talk about the future of of multilateralism and of international cooperation, we talked about identity. And how so much people's identity moves beyond their national identity, yet the nation state remains the unit of multilateralism. And somehow there's an invitation to meet people where they are, which is sometimes through their identity as a national and sometimes some other sort of identity. Another, for me, for the second session, as you mentioned, it was perhaps a bit more radical in thinking than the first one, also because we had many more participants. It was really a full house, which was great. But one that surprised me was that it was almost, not universal, but so frequent within that 3-hour session that when we spoke about democracy, we also had to speak about capital. We could not speak about one without speaking about the other. For example, we were talking about the checks and balances in a democratic system, and those very checks and balances that might be lacking in our social and economic systems. Anyway, that to me were, I mean, I've got pages and pages of notes and takeaways, but those are two that I slept on last night.
Well, thank you, and we will be sharing a lot of those. I mean, I pick on Dan because he was facilitating this discussion, and so there are things that come to a facilitator in a way when I'm rushing from one thing to the other, I pick up what I pick up, but someone who's there on an ongoing basis. I would also say that we had some really interesting discussions in the weeks leading up to the forum, and I remember we talked about the nation state, and I have heretical thoughts. I can imagine a world without nation states. I hope there aren't too many members of countries in the room who are now going to call for my head. We invited Rana Dasgupta. Some of you will have heard or read his piece. He talks a lot about whether we've got to that point where maybe it's the last throes of the nation state that we're living now, because so many of the things they're transnational, they're transversal, and people's connections and the problems to be solved, but also the allegiances that people have. And I got the impression also that, Dan, you were quite in the nation state space, and that you may have traveled a distance over the last few weeks. And I've traveled a distance in another direction as well, so I think that's super interesting. Can I ask people who were part of the idea factories to come in with some of the elements that they took away? We had one on high-intensity democracy on yesterday morning, and that was designed to why high intensity? Because we all think of protest movements. 1968, it's 50 years ago, in Paris and many other places. But that was energy. But it was outside the system. It was outside, you know. And we were thinking, well, could you energize democracy? So it doesn't have to be outside. How'd you get that type of energy, but in a positive way, to build something? That was the reason for the title, anyway. Who'd like to come in? And please say who you are, and if you can stand up, that way we can see you. There were 4 or 5 hands of people who had been in the idea factories. I can't believe you don't have... Okay, I'm going to pick on someone then. Flora. Ah, monsieur.
Bonjour à tous, merci beaucoup. Je suis Sheikh.
Thank you very much. My name is Sheikh Keita. I'm the president, the chair of Bridge for Innovations. And our activity is about spotting startups and potential applications for the market. So we try to secure the necessary capital, and we try to determine what these businesses need and how we can help them to emerge. It was very much interesting in idea sharing. And I've done a lot of soul searching, because we talk a lot about globalization and digital and governance. In terms of governance, states have a part to play. but I think they perform very poorly, because if I take Africa, for example, the development of digital in Africa hasn't been enough so far. Today the world is divided. We talk about equality, globalization. We talk about the world as like a village. But can we go on without giving other people the opportunity to move on? I have two questions. There are societies in the world today which are extremely, or businesses that are very rich, very powerful, more powerful than some states, and richer than states, as I said. But now, at the end of the day, we cannot integrate integrate these companies in societies and do things together. Some societies, some states want to harness digital for innovation, and so there should be different stakeholders involved. The problem is that governments do not have resources. They have economic and social problems. There's a drop in the price of commodities. So don't you think we could find a way of attracting those who have the money today to enter into new social contracts?
For example, in Africa, and focused on digitalization and bringing as many people as possible into that space. Yes.
Hi, I'm Marcel Lessig. I'm from Warsaw University of Economics, and also I'm economical journalist. First of all, what strikes me at the first idea factory, I took part in both of them yesterday, was that actually most of the participants, when we choose to put the problems, illness, and signs of strength on the board, was that actually most of the participants found the problems on the national level, not so much on the local or international level, which for multilateralism and international cooperation was quite a good sign. What we found very weird was that people sometimes identify the problems and they automatically go to them, think that they are national level. So no matter if they are on local level or the international level, they make the case that the guilty one is in the national level. So my theory is because they are the ones, they are the people who are for them responsible. They believe they are responsible for that. And with the very complicated world when we have on the national level, responsibility divide on very a lot of levels, on the local level, on the medium level, on the national level, and then we have international cooperation and international co-creation of law in terms of European Union, or maybe in the states in terms of federal and state level. That became a confusing environment for citizens to actually acknowledge who is to blame, and the blame game is always ending up in the some part of the world. That's why in Britain, for example, some campaign on the left side managed to take the blame game on the European level and not state it on the national level. But the issue of blame and the issue of responsibility, I think, was most important for me, I believe.
Okay, thank you. We're going to, shortly we're going to hear from Bruce in terms of a survey that you have carried out of our forum audience, which is the second time that you've done that. You did it last year. I'd like to give people a chance who have, if I were to ask you, it's a difficult question I know, but if I were to ask you, what walk would you walk that you may not have walked when you walked in the door Monday and Tuesday? So we've talked here, and we're talking now. But if you were thinking of an action that you might take, or an action that could be taken in your company, in your institution, in your family, what are the things that come into your mind? And the reason I pose the question is because one of the things that I've taken away is, what are we willing to do individually? This is not some Thatcherite call for the individual. This is that if an individual is willing to become more engaged, to become more committed, that individual makes a difference. And if we can decide to do that, we have an agency and an influence over others, whether that's in our families or people near to us. But I'd like to hear what you come away with that you might be able to turn into something that would be like an action or something a bit different that would have some sort of tangible form. It can be in a virtual or physical sense. Gentleman in the front row here.
Thank you. I'm Agustin from Argentina, and I'm chair of the Youth 20, the youth engagement group of the G20. I came here because OECD is a knowledge partner of the Youth 20, and we know that you have great data. What we learned in the forum is that all your data is very progressive and cutting edge. Something that I'm thinking back to Argentina, to my other hat, I'm director of a foundation that I work on education, is how to reshape social projects with the data that we are seeing from OECD. This is also like a commitment that I would like to ask you. How can we disaggregate those data for young people also? That's something that we need more powerful to actually change our projects on the territories and on the fields. But something that we will start doing, and we also speak in the laboratory outside, like the Better Life Index. We are going to take that to the Youth 20. We are not going to be speaking about economic growth. We are going to be speaking of how we want young people to grow up, like more healthy or with more access to public services or with more participation. That's something concrete that we are going to be doing soon.
Okay. Any more? Gentleman in the second row.
Okay, I think.
Hi, I'm Phil Riggins, and I have a company called, it's a very small company called the Brand and Reputation Collective, and what I've taken away from this, the last couple of days is basically a reaffirmation of the importance of continuous and honest and deep listening to the people that matter to us, you know, whoever they might be and wherever they might be. And the concrete idea that's come about is to create a virtual platform, a platform that's a virtual community, basically, a way for organizations and different groups to pull together the people that matter to them, and no matter where they might be in the world, and carry on a deeper, richer, ongoing conversation.
Have the people that matter to you changed in the last couple of years?
You mean in what sense?
People that you didn't attach importance to before, that you attach more importance to now?
It's kind of gone the other direction, because historically the work I've done is very similar to Bruce's, where you're actually trying to communicate how average people view reality and convey that up to different organizations. And I think that the work now is to help the organizations kind of get down into the community and to actually understand it.
Jean, you're pointing someone at the back? Yes?
I just moved forward because I think you couldn't
see me.
Sorry,
it's just the lights are really bright here.
Yes, I know. I think what I will be focusing on when I go back is the value of education. I've always thought education was important, but now I realized even more that it's very important. The other thing is not just for my own family, but for my country. I come from Canada, by the way. I think one of the things I'm going to do is I have access to our Minister of Finance, and I'm going to be talking to... Canada is doing a lot in terms of skills and training, but I think we could do better. So I will be, you know, having a conversation with him around that. And I think one of the ideas that made a big impact on me, which is also related to education and training, is look after the worker, not the job, because the jobs can disappear based on you know, what is going on in the world and the developments and so on. But I think we have to look after people and help them to prepare for the future. So I think those are the things that I'm leaving here with.
Fantastic. I saw a lady just behind you, if you can find the mic there.
All right. Hi, my name is Dan Minbaeva. I'm originally from Kazakhstan, but now I live in Denmark, and I'm Vice President for International Affairs at Copenhagen Business School. I think what I've taken away is that I need to talk more to people I disagree with, because I've seen lots of people in strongly arguing and agreeing with each other. So I haven't heard so many voices that actually bring us to another direction. So my personal takeaway is to kick myself out of a comfort zone and find people who would disagree with me and have a conversation with them. So, like, as you said also, we need to get to them. So CBS, as a leading European business university, need to get to those who we leave behind in our search for greater education, elite, upbringing, international cooperation. So we really need to think about who can we get in here next year, who could actually offer another perspective, because I saw lots of agreement. And this is great and very reassuring. However, I think in terms of multilateralism, got to get more multiple voices. Thank you.
Well, I've had a couple of long conversations with people about how difficult we found it to bring certain people to the forum who represent, no, sorry, they don't represent, they are. We have a lot of people at the forum, and we have a lot of people in the OECD and multilateral places who represent people. So we have people who represent the trade union movement. Fine. Can we have some people who work, I don't know, in Allentown, Pennsylvania, or don't work, and they haven't worked for a while? People in certain places, and we know where the geography of discontent is following a number of elections. So I would ask you, and I know you're one of our knowledge partners at the business school, and we're delighted, if you could maybe have as an ambition to bring a number of people next year, perhaps more than one, who would be those out of your comfort zone, and who might be out of the comfort zone of others. And I would extend the same invitation to those of you who are here who have that capacity, and also contact us if you know of someone. You say, look, that person, yeah, they might come. We don't want anyone to come here and think this is like a circus act. What we want is, and if people have voted to leave the European Union, fine. If they voted for President Trump, fine. If they voted for Cinque Stelle, fine. These are democracies, and you're entitled to do that. Nobody shot anybody. Why did they do what they did? That's a super interesting question. This year, we didn't manage to do something. I wanted to bring 3 MPs who lost their seats recently and do a panel to say why I lost. They didn't agree. One of them told me, one of them is Nick Clegg, former Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, very old friend of mine, and he said, well, if you'd chosen a different title, I might have done it. The other one is still in power, actually. He's still a minister in Italy because they haven't formed the new government. He no longer has a seat, but he's still a minister, which is a bit weird. But I wanted them to come with a testimony to say, what did you hear on the doorstep, your constituents, when you campaigned and you lost your seat as the sitting Deputy Prime Minister? What happened? And what did you learn and take away from that? Because I think politicians who failed have a huge amount to bring. We only ever talk to the politicians who've won. So everybody's salivating, I know, over Emmanuel Macron. I can understand it. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm not saying we should all be talking to François Hollande right now, but perhaps there is a value in talking to politicians who lost. And what did they learn from their loss? An honest conversation. There's a lady over here.
As an artist, my preoccupation has been about the imagination, how to navigate inside of the imagination. And one of the things that I was struck by, and one of the things that I've taken in from everything, all of the sessions that I've attended, is the idea about meaning, the need that people have for meaning. On every level, it's an issue that comes up with respect to loneliness. It's an issue that comes up in a lot of different contexts in terms of the glut of information. And art, the creation of art, is about meaning. And I attended yesterday the session of Tectonics from the Hungarian author, and he identified 3 principal areas, which was science, business, and politics. And I asked him, I said, well, what about art in terms of that? Because I mean, eventually, if we solve all the world problems, then there we are with what do we have? And in fact, it's there's something that art touches on that we need, as it's a deep part of our humanity. So that question, which is something that I've been thinking about for a long time, is how, as an artist, I can contribute to the conversation that's going on in terms of multilateralism, and also in my own identity, being from a very, very mixed background, having many different countries and disciplines inside of myself. I understand something about that, and so that question of how I can bring that knowledge is something that I think about.
Okay, we're a little bit pushed for time. I'm going to hand over to Bruce to talk through the survey that you've conducted.
Great, Anthony, that was great. And what I'm going to share with you is before the conference, we sent out to you, all of you, a request that you take an online survey. And many of you did. I want to thank you for that. And kind of share back with you what you told us about some of these issues that we have talked about today. And some issues that may come up in the future. About 269 of you responded to the survey. I know that may not sound much, but it's about 13 or 14%, 15% of the attendees, and that's actually a very good response rate. So we're really thankful to all of you, and thankful to the OECD. Who's partnered with us on this, because as Anthony said, it's the second year we've done it, and we think it's a very successful opportunity. We ask you, all of you, one of our first questions was, is life today better than it was 20 years ago for people in your country? And a majority of you said yes, life is better today than it was 20 years ago in my country. What I found interesting was 61% of the men respondents said this, but only 44% of the women. So you might want to think about that. Why is it that women are less likely than men to say that life is better today than it was 20 years ago? We then ask a question we've asked the public actually in the past as well, so we can compare this to OECD publics. We said, when children today in your country grow up, will they be better off financially or worse off financially than their parents? In other words, it's a way of getting at people's perspective on the future. A majority of you said, no, we think things are going to be worse off for the next generation. That's almost exactly what the publics in OECD countries think. Again, though, it was interesting that among those who said things will be better off, it was 48% of men, but only 33% of women. The women are much more pessimistic about the future and actually a little more judgmental about the present than men are, which, again, it merits further conversation about why that might be. We ask people about the pace of modern life because we have asked publics this question, and publics are divided in OECD countries about whether the pace of modern life is something they like or not. Most of you say you like the pace of modern life. I mean, I would submit to you, stop and think about why it is that you are more likely to like the pace of modern life than the average person in your country. Does that suggest that you've adapted better to the pace of modern life than the average person, and that may give us an insight into why average people may actually think slightly different about globalization, about the coming automation and AI disruption that we're going to have, things of that nature. Since diversity is a huge political issue in most of our countries, we ask all of you, do you think that ethnic, racial, and religious makeup of your country over the last 20 years has become more diverse or less diverse? Overwhelmingly, you all say, no, it's become more diverse. I think that's borne out by reality. All the numbers would suggest that. And among those who said it was more diverse, you overwhelmingly say that's a good thing. We're going to be asking this same question of the publics in OECD countries. We'll see what they say about this and whether, A, they see the diversity, and B, whether they think it's a good thing, or how many might say, I see it, but I don't like it. We then ask you all, and we'll be asking again the publics in your countries, over the past 20 years, has the equality between men and women in your country improved or not, changed or not? And basically, 3/4 of you say, yes, it's equality between men and women has increased, and 98% of you say that is a good thing. Those who said it had increased, 98% say it's a good thing. I will point out to you, though, men are more likely to say that it has increased than women. A majority of women among you say it's increased. A majority of men say it's increased, but men are more likely to say it's increased than women, which suggests to me, at least, that women are saying there's a little bit more here to do than we've seen already. We then asked people about family life, and this was an interesting result. Bear in mind, people thought diversity had increased and it was a good thing. People had said the equality between the sexes had increased, it was a good thing. Basically, most of you, 6 in 10 of you, say that family life has gotten weaker, not stronger, in the last 20 years. And overwhelmingly, among those who say it's gotten weaker, they say it's a bad thing. Again, it'll be very interesting to see what the public say about that. We also have, because democracy was one of the issues in this year's forum, we ask all of you a battery of questions about democracy and governance, and we can compare that to the responses we got in a recent survey we did in OECD countries and all over the world, actually. Basically, 9 in 10 of you say that representative democracy is a good way to govern your country, and 8 in 10 of the people in your countries believe that. We ask you another question, though. Would experts, not elected officials, do a better job governing your country? Actually, more than half of you say, yeah, that would probably be a better way to run our country. And I can tell you, this is in our broader survey we did in this is one of the dividing lines between emerging markets, developing countries, and advanced economies. Advanced economies, Europe, United States, basically say, we don't trust experts necessarily. The publics say that. Question. Our survey question would suggest, yes, in our societies, but not necessarily in some other countries. We then ask people, could ordinary people solve the country's problems better than elected officials? And 6 in 10 of you said no. We think ordinary people would not do a better job. This is in contrast then to the next question we ask you, which is, how do you feel about citizens, not elected officials, voting directly on the major issues facing the country? And 6 in 10 of you said that would be a good idea. Now, I'll admit to you that that looks like a contradiction. I would submit to you, my experience in working with polling data is human beings, even yourselves, are infinitely capable of holding mutually contradictory feelings at the same time. But what is interesting is that 2/3 of people in OECD countries say we want more referenda. Ponder that for a while and the implications of that as we go forward. I can tell you it is one of the findings that is widespread all over the world, even in countries that have never had a referendum in their history. People seem to be saying, I want a voice, more of a voice than I have in governance. We asked people about views of the multilateral system, because obviously that was one of the major themes of this conference. We asked people, what do you think brings people together in the world? Is it common values or common problems? By 2 to 1, you all said common values, not common problems. We can quibble, debate whether we actually share values or which values we share and which we don't, but as Dan once said, it's gone now, but in one of our sessions, perception is reality. So we collectively seem to believe that what brings us together is our values. and to build on that. We ask people, does the multilateral system benefit or has it benefited the economies of your countries? Yes, overwhelmingly you say that. But we then ask people, all of you, we name some attributes of the multilateral system and whether you thought that was an attribute of the multilateral system. Basically, very strongly, you believe that multilateral system promotes, and its institutions promote peace, promote prosperity, but the multilateral system or institutions are inefficient and are not transparent. What is interesting in this response is we asked the publics in Europe this question, but it was only about the EU, and we got the same results. People said the EU promotes peace, it promotes prosperity. You know, we believe in the ideals here, we believe in the kind of founding notions, but oh, by the way, we think it's inefficient and we think it's non-transparent. So when we think about how the public thinks about multilateral institutions, and we think about how we think about multilateral institutions, there's a great deal of consonance in those views. We buy the ideal, we're frustrated with the practice of that. And finally, we ask people, do the multilateral institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF and the OECD, et cetera, do they need major or minor reform? People, about half of you said they need major reform. Overwhelmingly, you acknowledge or believe that they need some kind of reform. And one of those reforms that we proffered to you was engaging more with citizens, and 3/4 of you say, yes, we need to engage, the multilateral system needs to engage more with citizens. So again, that's one of the themes we took away from these 2 days together. So those were the answers. What you told us, we were listening. Hopefully we can work with this data.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'd like to name check our former colleague Dan Morrison, who's joining part of the Pew Research team who've been working together with us here, and we look forward to continuing that, because one of the things, when we struck up the relationship and then formalized it, it's because the OECD tradition has been strong on objective data, or objective data in the sense that we're trying to sort of measure things that you can measure objectively. But you can't measure how people feel. And if people feel a certain way, and objective measures tell you something else, then that dissonance, if you don't try and close that gap and you're not aware of it, then you're going to be talking past each other, and then you're going to be in the situations that I think may be a strong part of the reason why people reasonably level criticisms at organizations that produce data, and level criticisms at people that then use that data. Now, we produce data, and we also attach meaning to the data. I remember when we began the Better Life Index initiative, and then said the most interesting thing for me from the Better Life Index was not how countries rank in terms of the data that we have, it's what people around the world think is most important to them. That was my own personal interest more in listening to what people were saying. But we had a strong discussion within the OECD, which my colleague Catherine at the end of the room will remember very well, Catherine Condea, where colleagues of ours in the statistical department were very reticent to say, well, but what are we going to say about it? Because we have to have enough, and we have to then be able to say something about it. And therefore, if we don't have enough and we can't say something, we shouldn't put it out. And yet the promise we'd made was, you talk to us and we will tell you what you think. But it was okay not to attach meaning. So, well, hey, put it out there. Let people make of it what they want to make of it. And I think that's an element around control, around can we allow people to have things and then make judgments around them, etc. And I don't know, I think that's something that we need to mull over as well. I found the data that you showed super interesting, particularly on values, because when we were talking about the Idea Factory and international cooperation, there was a lot of focus on, well, it should be task-driven, you know, it's because we've got common problems, that's what we should focus on. The fact that people think that actually the values bring us together, to my mind personally, I would say, oh, that's interesting, because I tend to think that the bedrock for cooperation is when two people actually have enough of a good feeling between each other. So if we were able to build a partnership between the OECD Forum and Pew, it's based on the fact that we have a high level of confidence and trust that we can say on both sides, well, we're going to bring our institutions together into this. We could have a commonality of interest, and yet Pew and the OECD hadn't come together before, and yet you'd have said it was obvious because the two go together. And so I think that very often the build up of those relationships and the processes that actually bring people together can be as important as the things that we have to address and try and find solutions to. Thank you very much for staying as long as you have stayed. And we hope to have you back next year. All the best. Enjoy the evening. Bye-bye.
I did fill out that survey. Oh, great. Thank you.
And yet, people believe that living in the United States for them and you can work with that, right? Yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying is, in general, that values bring people together much quicker and much more importantly than problems. And what we do is we focus on problems, we analyze problems to what, we speak of everything is about problems. And if we increase the focus, according to energy follows attention, if we have more attention on the values, the problems, it's like civil society having an increasing part in having better finances, you need less weapons. Just as simple as that, in a way. I mean, you build peace. I would be happy to talk to you more about this and share with you what we've got. And I would really like to do that. Yeah. So, because and I'll send you actually the values to please. No, but even the other ones are really the other super interesting. I'll send you these. Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. I love that. Thanks very much. And then it's like challenges your assumptions. Good fun. That's all about listening. You know? Yeah. I've heard a lot of very interesting things. I don't learn anything when people tell me what I already know. But when they tell me what they don't, what I didn't think they don't, then I have to think about it. Thanks a lot. Oh, sure. Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Duncan. I'm on the board and I'm the chair of communications for the International.
Oh, really? Fantastic.
And I'm going to be elected Dublin president.
Wow, congratulations.
I'm just telling you that in the context.
Yeah.
You had a number of points there that were related to things that actually in the halls everyone was talking about here, the women. I know you were on the panel, I attended your panel, and had a little bit of a discussion. If you dig underneath a lot of those things, what you find is the situation is degrading, not getting better. And that's what it is. I wonder if you use like a liquid or some kind of other 5.3 instead of a, is it getting better?
We don't tend to like those because we think, well, it probably wasn't okay for this audience, but we kind of, in principle, don't do that often. In our public setting, right? And
so that we don't do it some what I must have been on the side of it. But it would be interesting to ask.
Because if you took a panel of women who are my cohorts,
right, yeah,
and we looked at that, we could give you rich information.
Sure.
It'll be anecdotal.
Sure,
you won't be able to aggregate it.
But still, it's
it
very
adds context to that. And what I think is the challenge there is that a lot of us who are my age, when we started out, we thought this battle was our parents' generation. And we thought today, when we sit on boards, we wouldn't be facing what we face.
One of the non-personal, very personal illustrations and sentences. I had this naive, romantic kind of belief in kind of progress and okay, yeah, there was a tough fight on this issue or that issue. We got that behind us. We're moving on. And then you have the Supreme Court.
And it's getting worse with
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, thank you.
It's getting worse with the speed